Imagine the Milky Way, not as a painting in a textbook, but as a roaring furnace. 400 billion stars, 400 billion rolls of the cosmic dice. By every law of chemistry, this galaxy should be screaming. We should hear a chaotic chorus of radio signals. We should see the thermal heat of empires. Mathematics is a harsh prosecutor. It delivers a verdict. They must be here. But when we listen, we encounter something terrifying. Silence, absolute, heavy physical. We combed the darkness for decades and found nothing but the dead ticking of pulsars and the mindless hiss of a cooling universe. This is the Great Silence, a crime scene with no body, no weapon, no fingerprints. We are standing in a grand ballroom. The lights are on, the orchestra is playing, but no one else is here. Today, we conduct a forensic audit of the cosmos. We will trace the mathematics of inevitability to find where logic breaks. We will hunt for ghost structures hiding in the dark. In the end, we face two doors. Either we are the first to wake up, or we are the last survivors of a purge. The clock is ticking. The silence is getting louder. In the absolute silence of deep space, something is born that our ears cannot catch directly, but our instruments translate it into a chaotic, broken symphony. It is a scratchy, dry crackle, like the sound of thick paper being torn, punctuated by a low, guttural hum. If you could tune your mind to the frequency of radio waves, the universe would stop being mute. You would hear it choking on its own noise. 1% of this electrical hiss is an echo from the very beginning of time. It is the scream of the Big Bang, cooled to ultra-low temperatures, still shivering through space after 13 billion years. We exist in an infinite ocean of invisible vibrations. They beat against our detectors, carrying news of star cradles being born and the agony of black holes. But among this natural roar, we are looking for something else. We are not looking for random noise. We are looking for architecture. We are searching for an intelligent rhythm where there should only be chaotic physics. Imagine you are standing on the shore of the ocean on the darkest night imaginable. Before you is an abyss of water stretching beyond the horizon for thousands of miles. In your hands, you hold a tiny flashlight. Its beam barely pulls a single meter of wet sand from the darkness. All you hear is the monotonous, heavy sigh of the surf. You understand that somewhere out there, beyond the veil of gloom, massive ships could be sailing. Port lights could be burning. The life of entire continents could be boiling. But for your perception, only this narrow strip of light exists. Over the last 100 years, our radio broadcasts have created an invisible bubble around the Earth. It expands at the speed of light. Today, its radius is barely 100 light years. On the map of our galaxy, which spans 100,000 light years, this bubble is not even a drop. It is a microscopic dot, impossible to notice unless you know exactly where to look. But we are not just waiting on the shore. We have built colossal steel bowls, our man-made ears pointed into the abyss. These structures, sprawled across desolate valleys, stand frozen in anticipation, like futuristic altars. They possess a sensitivity beyond human understanding. They are capable of recording energy comparable to the heat of a single snowflake falling onto the water on the other side of the planet, if that energy comes from space. We turn the sky into cascades of numbers, sifting through every megahertz for a signal that was not created by the random motion of matter. And what do we record in this infinite search? Space reveals itself to us like a massive automated factory where there are no longer any workers. We hear the heavy metronomic beat of pulsars, dead stellar cores that spin hundreds of times per second with the precision of a clock. We hear the violent electrical hiss of nebulae. We hear the menacing roar of gas giants whose magnetic fields fight against the solar wind. It is a majestic symphony of non-living nature. It is complex, it is rhythmic, but it is absolutely empty. There is not a single greeting, not a single meaningful code, no irony, and no hope, only dry, indifferent physics. It is like walking through a modern metropolis of the future where everything functions perfectly. Neon signs reflect in the puddles, elevators slide silently up and down glass shafts. Automatic doors swing open to welcome you, but on the streets there is not a soul. Cars drive their routes obeying algorithms. Traffic lights change colors in the void. Lights are on in the office windows, but there is not a single person inside. It is a world of flawlessly working mechanisms that has lost its creator. We are looking for signs of inhabitants in a house where everything is turned on, but the owners left billions of years ago. We have just crossed an invisible border of the known world. Beyond this point lies the territory of hypotheses and terrifying patterns, where every answer we find only makes the surrounding darkness thicker. To enter this zone alone is to risk your sanity. That is why we are gathering a team of those who are ready to look truth in the face, no matter how cold or uncomfortable it may be. Your presence in this group is the fuel that allows our expedition to push deeper into the silence, into places where others are afraid to even look. Confirm your participation so that we know we are not alone in this void. The expedition is assembled. Now, let us unroll the old map we have used to search for neighbors for the last half-century and understand the exact moment it turned into a useless scrap of paper. We are returning to the foundation of our confidence, which has suddenly begun to crumble into dust. For decades, the scientific world existed in a state of strange, almost hypnotic calm. We believed that the equation of our origin had already been solved. We thought all that remained was to wait for technical confirmation. In the middle of the 20th century, when the first satellites began to puncture the thin film of the atmosphere, space did not seem like a terrifying abyss. It looked like a giant accounting ledger, where every income column was filled with mathematical precision. We felt like detectives who had already found every piece of evidence, drawn a portrait of the suspect, and were now simply waiting for him to walk into the station and confess. It was a zone of absolute intellectual comfort before a storm that we failed to predict. Imagine you are sitting at a massive oak table, pouring out the contents of a giant cardboard box. It is a puzzle with a billion pieces, but you are not worried. You have the reference picture right in front of you. It is bright clear and leaves no room for doubt. It shows a galaxy pulsating with life. Every piece of cardboard you pick up fits perfectly into its place, confirming your vision of the end result. You are absolutely certain. A little more effort, and a panorama of a crowded, noisy, and vibrant cosmos will open before you. This puzzle was given the name of its creator, Frank Drake. But do not view his formula as a dry string of Latin symbols and mathematical operators. The Drake equation is a cascade of giant sluice gates in a cosmic pipeline. At one end, we pour in pure physics. At the other end, we expect to receive a glittering stream of intelligent civilizations. The first gate is the star formation rate. We see this process with our own eyes. It is not magic. It is the heavy industry of the heavens, inside deep gas clouds, resembling dense, coal-black storm clouds. Gravity crushes hydrogen with such force that new thermonuclear furnaces ignite. This happens constantly. The Milky Way is a factory, churning out dozens of new suns every year. The second gate is planets. We used to only guess. Today we know for sure. Stars are not lonely. Every one of them has a retinue of scorched rocks, icy giants, and dust belts. Mathematics tells us that there are more planets in our galaxy than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of Earth combined. This is not just a number, it is a statistical tsunami. Then come the gates of habitability and biology. We are used to thinking that life is a fragile miracle, but the chemistry of the universe claims otherwise. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen. These are the most common elements. The recipe for life is written in a language that is understood at any point in space. If you leave a cup of milk in the sun, it will inevitably sour. If you leave an organic soup in the rays of a young star, it will inevitably begin to self-organize. It is not an accident, it is an inevitability dictated by thermodynamics. By the end of the 60s, we had assembled the edges of our puzzle. The calculations were relentless. In our galaxy alone, there should exist thousands, if not millions, of advanced worlds. We expected to hear from space, not silence, but a deafening roar of working machinery, the negotiations of merchant fleets, and the noise of billions of voices. We believed we lived in a predictable house where the footsteps of neighbors could be heard behind every wall. We were ready to enter that hall, certain that it was full of guests. We knew the answer, even before we asked the question, but when the real data began to arrive, it did not just fail to match our expectations, it dealt a devastating blow to the very logic of our existence. This was not like a small error in calculation that could be fixed with a few new formulas. This was a fundamental contradiction in the very fabric of reality. We faced a moment where the architecture of the cosmos refused to obey the rules that we considered unshakable. Imagine a simple physics experiment that you have repeated hundreds of times until it became automatic. You take a heavy metal ball, you lift it above the ground, and you open your fingers. Your body prepares for the sound of the impact. Your muscles already feel the microscopic vibration of the floor that should follow an instant later, but instead of falling, the ball freezes in mid-air. It hangs right in front of your face, absolutely motionless, ignoring gravity and everything you know about how the world works. In that moment, an icy chill runs down your skin. Your mind frantically searches for an explanation. It tries to reboot your vision because nature does not work this way. But the ball does not fall. This feeling of a deep physical wrongness is exactly what the scientific community experienced when the attempts to hear the cosmos resulted in a deafening void. In 1950, the great physicist Enrico Fermi voiced the question that became a crack in the foundation of our civilization. Where is everybody? If life is not a random mistake, but a statistical norm, and if the galaxy is overflowing with suitable planets, then other civilizations have had enough time to colonize the Milky Way thousands of times over. The galaxy has existed for 13 billion years. Even if they moved through the abyss on the most primitive ships, crawling at the speed of a glacier, they should have left their mark in every sector of space. We should have discovered their presence long before our ancestors learned how to sharpen stone. We searched for colossal engineering projects, stellar cages capable of fully absorbing the light of a sun to power the needs of a superintelligence. We searched for the chemical plumes of heavy industry that cannot be hidden in the atmospheres of distant worlds. We searched for automated probes that should have been drifting on the outskirts of our own solar system for millions of years, like forgotten mailboxes, waiting for the moment we would be able to notice them. But the data returning from the depths of space was hauntingly sterile. Our most powerful radio telescopes, capable of catching a whisper from hundreds of light years away, record only the dead static of cooling matter. We look through the eyepieces, hoping to see the lights of alien cities, but we find only the icy silence of ancient rocks. This is not just an absence of a signal. This is an active, dense silence that feels like the physical presence of something deeply frightening. It is as if someone erased all the tracks before we had a chance to turn around. It is like walking into an operating room in a massive modern hospital. The lamps flood the room with blinding light. Ventilators rhythmically pump air, making a steady mechanical sigh. Surgical instruments are laid out on sterile cloths in perfect, terrifying order, but there is no one on the operating table. The doctors have vanished. There are no nurses in the hallways. The air smells of ozone. Everything is turned on. Everything is functioning and waiting for action, but the subject does not exist. You stand in the center of this perfect cleanliness, and you realize someone is supposed to be here, but there is only you. In that moment, the realization hit. The universe is behaving in reverse. Our flawless mathematical models promised us a noisy, boiling ocean of life, but reality delivered a different verdict. We found ourselves in an empty, infinite crypt. Mathematics told us one thing, and the universe told us something else entirely. Logic claimed that we were part of a vast community, but the facts forced us to face a terrifying possibility. Either we are alone, or those who woke up before us encountered something so inevitable that not even an echo remains of them. The perfect picture on our puzzle box has finally crumbled, leaving us one-on-one with the silence. Imagine finding yourself in an unfamiliar metropolis in the dead of night. The streets are empty. Skyscrapers of glass and steel vanish into a leaden sky. All you have is an old yellowed map printed decades ago. You walk down a wide avenue, checking the lines on the paper. Suddenly, you realize the road ends in a dead end, where the map shows a clear path. You see a building that should not exist. You turn right, expecting a park, but you hit a blank concrete wall. In that moment, your brain does something strange. Instead of admitting that the map is hopelessly outdated, or that it does not belong to this city at all, you begin to look for excuses. You convince yourself that you simply turned at the wrong intersection. You go back, you count your steps, you stare at the house numbers under the dim light of the lamps. You are ready to blame yourself, your eyes, the poor visibility, anything just to avoid throwing that paper away. Because without that map, you are not just lost, you are trapped. This is exactly how official science felt at the dawn of the SETI program. In 1960, when Frank Drake pointed the 26-meter Green Bank radio telescope toward the stars Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani, he was not just conducting an experiment. He was opening the first page of a new human history. Project Ozma lasted only 4 months. The result was nothing, only the steady, lifeless hiss of the cosmic ether, but no one was going to give up. The first reaction of the scientific world was not disappointment. It was a fierce, methodical denial. We could not accept the thought that the universe is empty. We decided that we were simply not listening well enough. At first, we thought it was a calibration error. We checked the numbers again and again, hoping they would add up. We convinced ourselves that our instruments were too crude, our ears too small, and our methods too primitive. It is like trying to catch the signal of your favorite radio station in the basement of a concrete bunker. You turn the tuning knob, you pull out the antenna, you change the position of the receiver. You hear a crackle through which you think you can hear fragments of a melody or a human voice. You freeze, holding your breath, but the noise returns. You do not think that the radio station has stopped broadcasting. You are certain that the problem is in the cable, in the dead batteries, or in the thickness of the walls. You begin to fix reality, replacing fuses and resoldering contacts, because the alternative is too terrifying. The realization that on the other side, no one is speaking anymore. Over the next few decades, we turned this denial into an industry. We built ever more grand monuments to our refusal to be alone. In the Arecibo Valley, in the bowl of an extinct volcano, we constructed a 300-meter steel mirror capable of gathering radio waves with incredible precision. It was an attempt to build the perfect receiver that would pierce any wall. We searched for the water hole, a magic frequency range around 1,420 megahertz, where the noise of the galaxy goes quiet. We believed this was the universal mailbox of the universe. We believed if we looked into it long enough, we would eventually see a letter. Scientists spent thousands of hours in cramped equipment rooms filled with racks of hardware. The air in such places always smells of overheated metal, ozone, and stale coffee. It was the work of miners, sifting through millions of tons of waste rock in search of a tiny grain of gold. We checked the cables. We replaced amplifiers cooled by liquid helium to temperatures near absolute zero to remove the slightest thermal noise from the instruments themselves. We searched for errors in the software code. We blamed interference from microwave ovens, secret military satellites, and atmospheric anomalies. We acted like a person waiting for an important call, who checks for a dial tone every 5 minutes. You pick up the receiver, hear the steady tone of the network, and you calm down. The phone works. That means they just have not called yet. Maybe they are busy. Maybe they are checking their cables too. You do not hang up. You sit next to it for hours, days, years. It was a resistance to the obvious. We created complex algorithms to filter out terrestrial garbage. We pointed our antennas at thousands of star systems. Every new generation of computers gave us hope that now, finally, we will see the truth. We stretch the old theory over the new facts, like clothing that is far too tight and already bursting at the seams. We refuse to admit that the city around us had changed and that our map was a lie. We continued to walk into the dead end, convincing ourselves that the next turn would reveal the long-awaited view of inhabited worlds. We hoped that the silence was just a technical malfunction, something that could be fixed if we just found the right wire. But the more we repaired our instruments, the clearer it became. The equipment is working perfectly. Reality itself is silent. There comes a moment when denial stops being a defense and turns into a voluntary madness. You can endlessly recheck the cables, replace the cooling units, and rewrite the algorithms. But at some point, the sheer volume of empty results transforms into a new, terrifying reality. You realize that your instruments are not lying. They are working with a perfect, haunting precision. And it is that very precision that delivers the verdict on everything you once believed. Imagine walking up to the mirror in your bathroom. It is a familiar morning ritual, an act you have performed thousands of times, stitched into your muscle memory. You lift your right hand to wash your face, but your reflection stands perfectly still. It stares at you with cold eyes. Its arms are down. Its shoulders are relaxed. You freeze in horror, your heart beating against your ribs like a trapped bird. You make a sudden move, you wave your hand, you scream, but the figure behind the glass remains static. In that moment, you realize it is not the mirror that is broken. What is broken is your understanding of how light works, how matter works, and the very nature of the space between you and your double. This feeling of a deep, icy wrongness is exactly what science felt when it realized the great silence is not a technical glitch, it is a fundamental property of our universe. No matter how we turned the equation, the answer remained the same. Something did not add up. Mathematics, that infallible queen of sciences, told us one thing. The universe told us something else entirely. Our calculations predicted a galaxy swarming with life, like an anthill on a hot afternoon. But reality tripped us up. We faced a fact that defied all logic. If civilizations were a common occurrence, they would have redesigned the Milky Way to suit their needs long ago. The cosmos should look like a patchwork quilt of engineering projects, stellar bridges, and artificial suns. Instead, we see a virgin, untouched void. This is the collapse of more than just a theory. It is the collapse of our anthropocentric pride. We believed that evolution was a ladder leading upward, and that intelligence was the natural, inevitable finale of any biological process. We thought we were just one of many who had walked this path. But now, we are forced to look at a reality where that ladder might break off into nothingness after the very first step. Imagine the universe as a giant, automated clockwork mechanism. We have studied every screw. We understand how the gears of the planets turn, and how the springs of gravity push the stars along their orbits. We expected this mechanism to produce something tangible: life, intellect, culture. But when we opened the cover and peered inside, we saw that the clock is ticking, the hands are moving, but they do not tell the time. They just spin in the void, without meaning and without a purpose. This realization hits harder than any meteorite. We looked for meaning in the movement of celestial bodies, and we found only a flawlessly functioning emptiness. We tried to save the model by introducing new variables. Maybe civilizations do not live long enough? Maybe they are intentionally hiding, but these explanations are like trying to patch a hole in the side of a sinking Titanic with a common band-aid. If even one civilization in a million decided to expand, it would fill the galaxy in a time frame that is negligible by cosmic standards. The fact that we see no trace of them means only one of two things: either no one survives long enough, or no one is ever born at all. This feeling of wrongness in reality becomes physical. It feels like lead in your stomach. You are standing on the threshold of understanding that everything you were taught is just a beautiful fairy tale, a story we told ourselves in the dark so we would not be so afraid. We built our plans for the future on the assumption that the cosmos is a welcoming garden. But now we see it is more like a barren desert, one where even the hardiest weed cannot take root. The Drake equation has turned from a guiding star into a gravestone. Every one of its factors, which used to give us hope, now feels like a mockery. Lots of planets? Great. That means the graveyard will be enormous. Life starts easily? Wonderful. That means billions of attempts have already ended in nothing. Intelligence is an advantage? Perhaps, but it is an advantage that leads to the dead end of self-destruction faster than we can even realize it. We are standing before the shattered mirror of our understanding. The shards cut our hands. In the reflection, we do not see a glittering future among the stars. We see a lonely spark, lost in infinity, that is about to go out. This is the point of no return. We can no longer ignore the silence. We must admit that the model is broken, and now we have to find out. Did we make a mistake in our calculations? Or is the universe itself a place where intelligent beings simply do not belong? We are moving into a zone where the light of science grows dim and the shadows of what we have discovered are beginning to take on terrifyingly sharp outlines. Imagine you are in the heart of an infinite lifeless desert. Around you for thousands of miles, there is nothing but scorching sand, gray dust, and the hollow howl of a wind that meets no obstacle in its path. You are absolutely alone. You turn on an old radio and begin to slowly rotate the tuning knob, wading through endless layers of static noise. That dry, indifferent crackle that nature itself produces. You expect nothing but this monotonous hiss. Your mind is already used to the loneliness, lulled by the rhythm of the void. And suddenly, through the chaos of interference, you hear someone clearly, cleanly, and intentionally whistling a simple melody. Your first thought is that it is just an auditory hallucination, a brain starved for meaning, trying to assemble the random sounds of the wind into a familiar pattern. You convince yourself it is just atmospheric interference, the echo of a distant storm, or a glitch in the electronics of the receiver. But a chill is already running down your skin. You understand that the physics of the desert do not know how to whistle. Nature can roar, it can whisper, it can shudder, but it cannot create structure. This melody requires a mind, it requires lungs, it requires lips, it requires a will. In that moment, the world around you stops being just empty space. It becomes a place of the presence of the other, and that realization changes everything. This is exactly what happened in August 1977, when radio astronomy encountered its most terrifying and beautiful ghost. In the silence of the Ohio State University Observatory, among endless rolls of paper covered in columns of numbers and letters, something appeared that simply should not have been there. We were looking into the void, expecting only the usual silence and the dead radio noise of distant hydrogen clouds. But that night, the void decided to look back at us. Jerry Amon, scanning the data received by the Big Ear telescope, saw a sequence of characters, 6EQUJ5. To an ordinary person, this is just a random set of signs. But to a physicist, it was a scream piercing the darkness. It was a narrow, incredibly powerful beam of energy focused on a single frequency. It emerged from nowhere in the constellation of Sagittarius. It lasted exactly 72 seconds, exactly the time it took for the Earth to rotate and move the telescope lens out of that zone. This signal, which entered history under the short and emotional name, WOW, became our impossible artifact. Imagine a perfect glittering obelisk found in the middle of a primeval forest, where no human foot has ever stepped. It has no inscriptions, it makes no sound, but the very fact of its existence, its flawless edges and foreign material, scream that you are not the first one here. It is a stubborn piece of evidence that does not fit into any theory of natural origin. We spent decades trying to write this off as interference. We searched for reflections from secret military satellites. We checked if a random piece of space junk had drifted by at that moment, acting as a mirror for a terrestrial radio signal. We studied the tails of comets, hoping to find a natural mechanism capable of creating such a burst. But the deeper we dug, the clearer it became. Nature does not know how to focus energy like that. This was a technological fingerprint, short, clear, and absolutely inexplicable. This feeling of accidental discovery is the strangest thing in science. It is like walking through the abandoned attic of an old house, where everything is covered in a thick layer of century-old dust. You are certain no one has lived here for decades. You touch the dusty surface of a table, and suddenly you notice a distinct fresh palm print. It does not belong to you. It is warm. The wow signal left us suspended between ecstasy and terror. On one hand, it was hope, the first proof that the Drake equation was not a lie and the galaxy is inhabited after all. On the other hand, it was a frightening ambiguity. The signal never repeated. We returned to the same point in the sky thousands of times, using instruments millions of times more sensitive than those we had in the 70s. But the sky remained silent. It is as if that mysterious whistle in the desert sounded once, made your heart stop, and then vanished forever, leaving you to doubt your own sanity. Was it a random flash of an alien beacon that brushed our planet for a moment before going out for eternity? Or was it the last gasp of a civilization whose message traveled to us for thousands of years, only to catch us in the moment of our infancy? We have encountered a phenomenon that is forbidden by the current physics of random processes. We discovered something that has structure, purpose, and energy, yet it remains one of a kind. In the world of science, where everything must be provable and repeatable, this signal became a thorn that cannot be pulled out. It made us realize that the silence around us is not an absence of events, it is an absence of our understanding. And now that we have heard this whistle once, we can never look at the stars with the same calm again. We know someone is out there, or at the very least, someone was. And that someone left us a riddle that leads straight into the heart of the great silence. When the echo of a fleeting whistle in the void fades, you are left alone with a silence that no longer feels empty. It becomes dense, heavy, and terrifyingly eloquent. In science, we are used to viewing an absence of data as a failure, but in the case of the search for intelligence, the silence itself is the most powerful signal of all. It is a stubborn message telling us that reality does not match our most basic assumptions. We tried to write this vacuum off as an echo, as interference in our own minds, as temporary glitches, or the possibility that we are simply looking in the wrong direction. But year after year, decade after decade, the sky continues to answer us with a perfect, indifferent silence, repeating itself with the frightening precision of a metronome. Imagine returning to your apartment after a long day at work. You live alone. You have no guests, no pets, no one who could have entered the house in your absence. You open the door, and the first thing you notice is the smell of freshly cooked food. You walk into the kitchen and find a steaming hot dinner on the table. The steam rising from the plate is absolutely real. It burns your fingers. You smell the aroma. You see that the silverware is laid out with perfect precision. But the apartment is still empty. The closets are bare. No one is hiding behind the curtains. The front door was locked tight. In that moment, your idea of the safety of your own home, of logic, and of how your world is built shatters into pieces. The fact that the dinner is hot means that someone was here literally a minute ago. Someone who knows your habits, someone who has the keys, and someone who for some reason decided to remain invisible. This is the state of our current understanding of the universe. We see hot dinners everywhere. We find planets in habitable zones. We see organic molecules in interstellar clouds. We observe stars that have existed for billions of years, providing perfect conditions for life to develop. The dinner is ready, the universe is warmed up and waiting, but the table is empty. This stubborn signal of silence forces us to admit a terrifying truth. Someone or something should have been here. If life is a natural process, then the Milky Way should be filled not just with signals, but with physical tracks. We are talking about civilizations that could have appeared millions or even billions of years before us. On those timescales, colonizing the entire galaxy is a morning stroll. They should have left behind industrial ruins, giant engineering structures, or at the very least radioactive waste, but we see nothing. Silence becomes an alarm. In intelligence operations, or the world of forensics, a sudden loss of communication is the loudest sound possible. If your informant always checked in at the same time, and today his frequency is empty, you do not think the radio is broken. You understand that something catastrophic has happened. The universe is not silent because it was dead from birth. It is silent as if something happened within it, as if those who were whistling in the dark suddenly went quiet on command, or under the pressure of a force that we cannot yet comprehend. This realization completely changes the rules of the game. We are no longer looking for pen pals. We are studying the borders of a graveyard where the headstones have been eroded by time. We are beginning to understand that the Great Silence is a fundamental law of cosmic evolution, one that we simply did not include in our formulas. Perhaps silence is the only way to survive in a forest where predators roam, or even worse, silence is the sound of what remains after the harvest is finished. We have faced the fact the house is inhabited, but the owners have vanished, leaving the lights on. This signal has changed our perception of the universe forever. We have stopped being curious tourists expecting a warm welcome. We have become involuntary witnesses in a case that spans billions of light years. Now that we have accepted the silence as evidence, we need to understand the shape it hides. We are moving from simple observation to the attempt to build a new, terrifyingly elegant model of the world. A world where the absence of life is explained far more logically than its presence. We can no longer afford the luxury of denial. When all technical checks are complete, when the cables are resoldered and the antennas are tuned for perfect reception, and the result is still an icy void, it is time for the hardest work of all. We must admit that the anomaly is not an error in the data. It is the data. We are no longer trying to drive the silence out of our house. Instead, we are beginning to build a new, terrifyingly elegant model for it. We are moving from describing the surface to attempting to peer into the very depths of the mechanism that governs life and death on a galactic scale. For centuries, we have behaved like people trapped in a deep, dark cave. The only source of light is somewhere far behind our backs, while our eyes are chained to the jagged stone wall in front of us. All this time, we have studied the strange dancing spots of gloom. We gave them names. We classified their movements. We believed they were reality itself. But now, the realization has come. We were not looking at the objects themselves, but only at their shadows cast upon the wall of this cave. The old physics, the old biology, the old calculations, all of it described only the flat, distorted projections of something far more massive and complex, something passing us by in the true light, which we are not yet able to perceive. Imagine you live in an absolutely flat, two-dimensional world. For you, there is no concept of up or down, only length and width. You are a drawing on an infinite sheet of paper, and your entire universe is limited to this plane. Your perception is perfectly tuned to understand lines and flat shapes, and suddenly, without any warning, a three-dimensional sphere begins to pass through your world. What would you see? You could not comprehend a sphere. There is no room for that kind of volume in your world. You would see a strange, terrifying anomaly. A tiny dot appears out of nowhere. It begins to grow, turning into an expanding circle. It reaches its peak and then begins to inexplicably shrink until it vanishes entirely. You cannot see the object itself, but you see its track. You observe as something greater than your reality invades it, leaving behind chaos and questions for which you have no answers. This is exactly what we observe in our data in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And we see the track, that very silence, which is a projection of a fundamental law passing through our reality. We call this law the Great Filter. The Great Filter is not just a scientific hypothesis, it is an invisible wall that we did not notice until we walked right up to it. It is a series of barriers, each standing in the way of the evolution of life, and each of which may turn out to be an insurmountable dead end. Imagine it as an industrial process, a massive conveyor belt where civilizations are manufactured, but there is a defect in this conveyor, hidden deep within the design. Dozens, hundreds, millions of blanks pass through the first stages of assembly, the birth of simple cells, the emergence of multicellular organisms, the development of a brain, but at some point, at a specific stage, the mechanism fails. Again and again, with mathematical ruthlessness. It is like an industrial press that drops with perfect precision at the exact same moment. Billions of attempts to create something complex are turned into dust. We look into space and we see the result of this work, piles of biological waste. Planets that were ready to become a home for intelligence, but remained only cold graves for microbes that failed to take the next step. We see the silence because the noise of civilization is a byproduct that the Great Filter weeds out at the very earliest stages. If this filter is behind us, then we are the greatest lucky streaks in history. We passed through the eye of the needle, through which no one else could squeeze for millions of light years. We are those very flat creatures who saw the shadow of the sphere and by some miracle were not crushed by its mass. But what if the filter is waiting for us ahead? Imagine that every step of technological development is like a game with a loaded gun. The discovery of nuclear energy, the creation of artificial intelligence, the manipulation of genetic code. These are new levels where the Great Filter can snap the trap shut. Perhaps the silence in the galaxy is caused by the fact that every civilization, upon reaching a certain level, inevitably destroys itself faster than its first radio signal can reach a neighboring star. It is an industrial suicide baked into the logic of the development of intelligence. We see the empty streets of the cosmic metropolis because every one of its inhabitants invented a way to burn their house to the ground before they learned how to build bridges. This new model of the world is terrifyingly elegant. It explains everything: the presence of billions of planets, the ease with which life begins, and that very same deafening silence. The cosmos is not a garden, and it is not a desert. It is a giant separator that is constantly spinning, throwing everything unnecessary aside toward entropy. We see the shadows and reflections of this process in every empty radio channel. We are no longer looking for friends. We are studying the physics of the barrier. We realize that all this time we were looking in the wrong direction. We were looking for a sphere where we could only see a circle. We were waiting for guests in a house where the front door has been welded shut with steel. And now that we have begun to understand the true shape of this obstacle, we face the most frightening stage of our investigation. We must go inside this labyrinth and understand, is the Great Filter simply a natural obstacle, or is it part of someone else's much larger design? We are moving from studying shadows to attempting to feel the very wall that separates us from eternity. A new theory is not born in a blinding flash of insight. It seeps into the mind gradually, like a strange escaping feeling, like an attempt to remember the details of an important but terrifying dream. The pieces of the puzzle that we struggled so painfully to connect have finally come together, but now, as we look at the result, a coldness takes hold of us. The picture on the table turned out to be nothing like the one drawn on the box. We no longer see a welcoming galaxy ready to take us into its embrace. We see something else, something that demands we completely destroy our old architecture of thought and build a new, terrifyingly elegant construction upon its ruins. Imagine your entire life has been a wandering through a vast, dark mansion whose true dimensions are hidden behind a veil of eternal gloom. For years, for entire generations, we sat in one single room. We studied every corner. We measured the height of the ceilings. We gave names to every crack in the wallpaper and every fiber in the carpet. We were absolutely certain that this room was the entire house. We built our plans based on the idea that there was nothing beyond the walls but emptiness and cold. But this discovery, this unbearable silence that we found in space, it acted like a sudden icy draft. It forced a heavy, previously unnoticed secret door to creak open just a fraction. And now, through the narrow crack of that door, we see an infinite hallway receding into absolute darkness. We do not know what hides there. We do not know who or what roams those passages, but we know one thing for certain. The house is much larger than we thought, much larger, and our cozy now is just a tiny lit patch in an infinite labyrinth where laws operate that we never dared to even imagine. This new model forces us to consider options that official science once brushed aside. Perhaps the universe is not empty at all. Perhaps it is, dangerously overpopulated. Think of the feeling when you walk into a thick, ancient forest in the dead of night. If you act noisy, if you scream and shine a bright flashlight in every direction, the forest will seem dead to you. The birds will go silent. The beasts will hide in the undergrowth. The insects will stop their chirping. You will stand in the center of that silence and think that you are the only living object for miles around. But this silence is not a sign of an absence of life. It is a sign of its extreme concentration. It is the silence of a forest where every inhabitant knows the one who makes a sound becomes the prey. Perhaps the galaxy is exactly such a dark forest. Radio silence is not technical backwardness. It is the highest form of survival strategy. Those who came before us did not vanish. They simply learned not to stick their heads out. They sit in their burrows, holding their breath, and watch us with terror. An infant who has walked into the middle of a dark clearing and is screaming at the top of its lungs, hoping to attract attention. Or imagine another version. The mansion is vast, but we are not the owners, and not even the guests. We are the objects of an experiment. We are locked in a nursery with padded walls. Everything we see through our telescopes is merely scenery painted on the windows of our cradle. This is the zoo hypothesis. Perhaps the Great Silence is a strict quarantine. Highly advanced civilizations might surround young worlds with invisible barriers, blocking any signals from the outside to allow us to develop naturally without traumatizing our psyche with the sight of engineering projects on the scale of entire constellations. We search for a needle in a haystack, not realizing that the haystack itself is an artificial construct created so that we never find the exit. Any of these models explains the anomaly. Silence stops being a mystery and becomes a logical consequence of how the system is built. If the universe is a labyrinth, then the absence of tracks in the sand means either the path through it is deadly or those who walked it are carefully erasing their footprints. We are standing at the beginning of this infinite hallway. The old map of the city has burned. Now we must move by touch, guided by the sound of our own breath and the faint movement of the air. The new theory is complex. It requires us to give up our status as the center of the universe and admit we are either a random survivor or a locked-in observer. It works. It binds together trillions of planets and millions of years of silence. But there is a high price to pay for this elegance, the price of our peace of mind. We have realized that the house is much larger. We have seen the door, and now we have no other choice but to enter that hallway. We can no longer return to our cozy room and pretend that the cracks in the wallpaper do not exist. We have traveled a long road since the beginning of this video. Most viewers stopped halfway, unable to bear the weight of the questions we are asking, but you are still here. You continue to listen, even as the pulse of the universe grows more and more anxious. This means that you, like us, are not satisfied with cheap scenery. You are one of the few who is ready to admit, we do not know the truth, but we are obligated to seek it. Channels like ours are rare, narrow beam signals of meaning in an infinite sea of static. Subscribe to strengthen this signal. Every bit of your participation is another watt of power for our transmitter. And now that we have admitted the scale of this labyrinth and understood that we are not alone in it, let us ask the most important, the most intimate question. What does this discovery actually say about us? We have completed our technical audit of the void. We have sifted through billions of gigabytes of radio noise. We have measured the temperature of cooling suns, and we have peered into the gravitational scars left by black holes. But now, the time has come for the most difficult transition of all. We must shift the conversation from distant stars and lifeless atoms to the person who has been standing at the eyepiece of the telescope all this time. We must realize that this discovery, or rather, the absence of any discovery at all, changes more than just our physics textbooks. It changes our very place in the world, our identity, and the price we pay for the right to call ourselves intelligent beings. When we look at the data, at those steady, infinite lines of empty ether, we suddenly begin to understand that they reflect not so much the properties of the cosmos, but our own limitations, our own deepest primal fears. The question is no longer what is out there in the dark. Now it sounds much harsher and more intimate. Who are we in comparison to this absolute silence? So what does this discovery actually say about us? Perhaps for centuries, we were not just looking for an answer or a scientific fact in the universe. Perhaps we were looking for a confirmation of our own significance. We hope to see brothers in intelligence, older teachers, or even formidable enemies in the stars. Anyone, as long as we did not have to admit that we are an accidental, fleeting biological glitch on the outskirts of an indifferent galaxy. We wanted to believe that our voice matters, that our presence here is part of a grand design. But the great silence delivers a different verdict. It can be compared to that strange, almost mystical feeling that every one of us has experienced at least once in our lives. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night from an inexplicable anxiety. The house is absolutely quiet. You only hear the faint ticking of a clock or the hum of the wires in the walls. You get up, you go to the bathroom to wash your face and pull yourself together. You walk up to the mirror, you turn on the light, you raise your eyes, and for one short, icy second, it seems to you that someone else is standing in the reflection. This face is familiar to you, down to every wrinkle, every curve, but it seems absolutely foreign. In that moment, you see yourself not as a personality with a name and a history, but as a biological object, a strange form of life cast into this world without any instructions. This is exactly how we look at our own planet now. The Earth is the same as it was yesterday. The same mountains, the same oceans, the same 7 billion destinies. But in the light of this cosmic silence, we see it completely differently. It no longer seems like the unshakable center of the universe. It turns into a tiny, fragile drop of organics hurtling through a vacuum billions of miles long, where for millions of light years, there is no one who can hear our cry for help. This loneliness is not just a beautiful figure of speech. It is a physical quantity, as measurable and relentless as the mass of a distant star or the speed of light in a vacuum. It is the cold realization that we can make a fatal mistake. We can burn our atmosphere in the fire of progress, poison the oceans, or turn our cities into radioactive ash. The universe will not even blink. In this vast automated mansion of creation, there will simply be no one left to notice our disappearance. The silence will not get louder. The thermonuclear furnaces of the stars will not stop producing helium. Our death will have as much meaning for the galaxy as the falling of a dry branch in a forest, where there is not a single listener. We searched for the alien in the depths of the Sagittarius constellation, but we found him in our own bathroom mirror. We realized that the true anomaly is not the absence of signals from aliens. The true anomaly is us. It is our mind, our curiosity, our ability to ask questions of a void that is not obligated to answer them. We stand before a galaxy that is 13 billion years older than us, and we understand we are the first time this galaxy has opened its eyes and realized itself. Or, what is even more terrifying, we are the last time. This feeling of deep, cold responsibility hits harder than any scientific discovery. We can no longer act like children playing with matches in a nursery. If we are the only witnesses in this empty hall, then a weight falls upon us that could crack the very foundations of our psyche. We were not just looking for neighbors. We were looking for witnesses to our existence, because we are afraid that without an external observer, our story has no meaning. But now we are forced to admit we are the very observers we have been waiting for so long, and this discovery forces us to shift the focus of our vision entirely. We move from studying stars to studying the very boundaries of how we perceive this world. We are beginning to understand that the mystery was always much closer than it seemed. Perhaps the greatest mystery we have encountered in decades of searching does not lie out there in the unreachable and icy depths of space. Perhaps it has always been much closer, inside the very mechanism of how we look at the world. For centuries, our development has resembled a person standing before a window in the deep, moonless twilight. We stared into the thick darkness behind the glass, not blinking, not breathing, trying to catch anything on the empty street. A flicker, a shift, a silhouette, a random passerby, or a dim light in distant windows that did not feel like home. We polished that glass to a mirror shine. We built more complex and powerful instruments to pierce that viscous gloom with our gaze. We froze and held our breath, waiting for the darkness to finally give up its main secret. But this prolonged crisis of understanding has forced us to realize something terrifying and yet magnificent in its simplicity. All this time, while we pointed our antennas into the void, we were not looking through the glass. We were looking at our own faint reflection in it. We were not studying the universe in its true primal form. We were only studying the limits of our own vision, the paradoxes we painfully collide with today, that deafening and dense silence surrounding our planet is not necessarily an objective property of star systems. It is rather the architecture of our own consciousness, desperately trying to impose its familiar rules of the game onto infinity. Imagine that from birth, you were forced to wear glasses with heavy blue lenses. You describe the world as an endless combination of azure, indigo, and cobalt. You build complex scientific theories about the blue nature of reality itself. You go on long expeditions in search of other colors, but you always find only new, unstudied shades of the same spectrum. You are sincerely convinced that you are studying objective truth, but in reality, you are only studying the physical limitations of the instrument through which you perceive reality. Our drive to find intelligence in the cosmos is those very lenses. We look for biological life similar to our protein structure. We look for radio waves that we ourselves learned to use only a century ago. We look for logic and motives that would be understandable to our human brain. We are looking for ourselves multiplied many times over across the scale of the galaxy. And when we do not find this familiar mirror double, we fall into despair and call the universe dead and empty. But what if it is not empty at all, but simply infinitely other? What if the phenomenon we call intelligence is not the pinnacle of evolution and not a universal finale for all matter? What if it is just one of millions of ways to exist that happen to be understandable and accessible specifically to us? We tried to find a tiny spark of the intellect we recognize in a place where perhaps a fire of meaning is raging, for which no words exist in our language, for which no neural connections exist in our brain. We tried to measure the ocean of creation with a small teaspoon and were sincerely surprised that it could not hold a whale. This realization forces us to make the sharpest turn in the history of thought. We must completely shift the focus of our attention. We can no longer afford to look at the stars as distant foreign objects, separated from us by billions of miles of indifferent vacuum. It is time for us to understand that the observer and the observed are not two different entities. They are parts of the same fundamental mechanism. The universe perceives itself through our eyes. It asks itself questions through our mouths. And that great silence that frightened us for so long is perhaps not a sign of our abandonment at all. It is merely the silence in a vast hall where the viewer has finally realized that he is the only actor on this colossal stage. Throughout our history, we have dedicated ourselves to building instruments that allowed us to see further and hear quieter. We created detectors capable of catching a faint tremor in space-time itself, born from the collision of black holes on the other side of creation. But in this arms race, we forgot to calibrate the most important and most temperamental instrument of all, ourselves. We looked for a golden ticket, giving us the right to enter a community of higher superintelligences, not understanding that the very fact of our search, our very ability to be surprised by the silence, is already a ticket to eternity. We studied the physical boundaries of the cosmos, but in reality, we were feeling the edges of our own cradle, trying to understand where we end and where something else begins. When you look out a window on a dark night, your reflection in the glass seems ghostly and translucent. It overlaps with the outlines of trees, houses, and distant stars, creating a strange illusion of someone else's presence out there in the cold night air. But as soon as you turn off the light in your room, your reflection vanishes instantly. The window stops being a mirror and becomes truly transparent. Perhaps it is time for us, too, to turn off our anthropocentric pride, our obsessive desire to be significant, and our ancient primal fear of being alone. Only by discarding these filters can we see the universe as it truly is, not as we imagined it in our cozy offices. We are standing on the threshold of the greatest intellectual shift in the history of our species. We have finally understood that silence is not an absence of an answer. It is the answer, as clear and direct as possible. It tells us that the rules of the game have changed forever. We are no longer looking for confirmation of our normality in the eyes of other civilizations. Instead, we are beginning to truly study our uniqueness. We look at the stars not as distant and foreign lights, but as a clean, untouched canvas upon which we have yet to write our own story. If there is no one else in the galaxy, it does not mean we have lost. It means that we are the ones who woke up first, and our right to this primacy is confirmed by every silent light year surrounding our small planet. We are moving from the status of passive seekers to the status of creators of meaning, and this path, full of dangers and discoveries, is only beginning. We are no longer looking for witnesses to our existence. Now, we ourselves become the witnesses to the life of the universe. We have reached the limit. Behind us lie decades of searching, billions of burned watts of energy, and mountains of mathematical proof that tried to fill the void of the galaxy with our hopes. We have taken this massive mechanism apart, piece by piece. We have peered into the secret rooms of the mansion and realized that the silence surrounding us is not an emptiness, but the foundation of our new reality. Now, we stand at the very threshold. Before us is not a wall and not a dead end. Before us is an open doorway leading into the absolute impenetrable darkness of an infinite future. Imagine this moment as a physical sensation. You are standing in the doorway of the house where you have spent your entire life. Behind you are familiar sounds, the light of lamps, the warmth of heated air, and the habitual smell of old books and cold tea. It is everything you know, everything you love, and everything that gives you a sense of safety. But ahead, there is only the abyss. There is no floor, no walls, no landmarks. You feel the cold breath of space against your skin, space that has never known the warmth of stars. You hear a silence so deep that your own pulse begins to resonate within it. In this moment, you realize you cannot stay in the house. It has become too small for what you have become. But to step into that darkness is to forever change the very essence of the human being. This is the true scale of the Fermi Paradox. We looked for neighbors to feel safe, but we found only an empty cradle waiting for its master. We hoped that someone else had already paved the roads among the stars, set up the beacons, and written the rules of the game. But the roads are not built, the beacons are not lit, the rules do not exist. We are those very pioneers we read about in legends. Only the scale of our desert is measured not in miles, but in billions of light years. We stand before the blank page of creation, and the only ink we have is our will and our imagination. Look into that doorway. The cosmos no longer seems like a backdrop for someone else's stories. It is turning into our workshop. If we truly are the first spark of intelligence in this sector of reality, then a responsibility falls upon us that words cannot describe. We are the architects of the future. Every step we take, every decision we make today on this small blue planet will echo across millions of worlds, billions of years from now. We are the ones who must light the first fires in this darkness. We are the ones who must turn dead rocks into inhabited gardens. This burden may seem unbearable. It is easy to feel insignificant in the face of eternity, when you realize you are alone. But within this loneliness, there is also the highest form of freedom. We do not need to adjust to someone else's standards. We do not need to fear the wrath of superior civilizations or try to meet anyone's expectations. The universe has provided us with a perfect laboratory, free of overseers. We are free to make mistakes. We are free to fall and rise. We are free to create art and science that will be unique in the scale of all creation. Our loneliness is our greatest gift. Imagine, millions of years from now, how our descendants will look back at Earth. For them, it will not just be a home, it will be the place where it all began. The sacred point from which life, like a forest fire, spread across the entire galaxy. They will know that once here, in this tiny system, people stood before the very same doorway we are looking into now. They will remember our fear, our doubt, and our silence, but they will also know that we found the courage to take that first step. Now, we stand in the silence. The visual meditation of this moment requires no colors or movements. It is an internal state of absolute peace before the storm of achievement. Imagine the light in the room behind you, slowly fading out. The outlines of familiar objects dissolve into the gloom. You no longer see your hands. You do not feel the floor beneath your feet. You become pure consciousness, floating in the center of an infinite stellar ocean. You hear the space around you begin to vibrate ever so slightly, like a stretched string, ready to make its first sound. Everything we talked about, the Drake equation, the signals in the ether, the great filter, and the shadows in the cave, all of it was just preparatory exercises. We were learning to see in the dark. We were training our ears to distinguish the whisper of matter. And now that our preparation is complete, we understand the true history of humanity will not begin when we meet the others. It will begin when we finally accept the fact that the others are not there and never were, that we are the very answer we have been looking for so long. We stand at the threshold. The door is open. Ahead are billions of years of development, trillions of uninhabited planets waiting for their time, and infinite possibilities to turn this great silence into a great symphony of life. We are no longer afraid of the dark because we ourselves have become the light. We are no longer afraid of the silence because we are the ones who will fill it with meaning. If space bends under the weight of our thought, can time ever break? If this terrifying and beautiful finale was just a long and difficult beginning, what waits for us next? We take the step.